It's been more than 3 decades since the world first fell in love with Vivian and Edward. The red dress, the limo, the unforgettable smile that lit up the screen. Pretty Woman wasn't just a movie, it was a love story that defined a generation. And now, against all odds, the two people who made it magic are finally back together. Julia Roberts Richard Gere, the romance you thought had ended, is about to begin again. Asterisk in 1990, Pretty Woman stormed into theaters and became a phenomenon. It wasn't just another romantic comedy, it was lightning in a bottle. The story of a wealthy businessman and a woman from the other side of the tracks, told with charm, wit, and heart, struck something deep in audiences around the globe. People didn't just watch Vivian and Edward's journey, they believed in it. They wanted to live it. That film became the kind of cultural touchstone that doesn't just fade away with time, it grows in legend. Julia Roberts was at the start of her career, but the moment she appeared on screen, audiences knew she was something special. Her laughter, her vulnerability, her fire, they all came together in a performance that was impossible to forget. Richard Gere, already a Hollywood star, brought an effortless elegance to Edward Lewis. Together, they created chemistry so electric that even today it's hard to imagine one without the other. Back then, the movie broke box office records, earning hundreds of millions worldwide. But beyond the numbers, Pretty Woman became a comfort film for millions, a story of transformation, hope, and love that transcended social boundaries. It had moments that became iconic: the jewelry box snap, the shopping spree on Rodeo Drive, the fairy tale ending with the white limo pulling up to the fire escape. These scenes weren't just part of a script, they became part of cinema history. Over the years, fans begged for more. There were rumors, whispers of a possible follow-up. Magazine articles would speculate, talk shows would bring it up. Julia and Richard were often asked if they'd ever work together again in a sequel. Sometimes they laughed it off, sometimes they gave cryptic answers. But as the years passed, the idea seemed more like a dream than a reality. Both actors moved on to other projects, built incredible careers, and lived their own lives. Still, in the hearts of fans, Vivian and Edward remained alive, frozen in time, waiting for their story to continue. The magic of Pretty Woman never faded. It was replayed on television year after year, discovered by new generations, and even adapted into a hit Broadway musical. But the original film still stood alone. No sequel had ever been made. No one thought it would be. After all, how could you capture lightning twice? How could you risk touching something so beloved? The risk was enormous. Mess it up, and you wouldn't just make a bad film. You'd break the hearts of millions. But something changed. Somewhere in the last few years, the idea began to take root again, not as a studio cash grab, but as a story worth telling. A chance to revisit two characters who had changed not just each other's lives, but ours as well. The question was no longer why would they make it? It became how could they not? And so the whispers grew louder, the meetings began. Quiet, careful conversations between Julia, Richard, and the creative minds who knew the weight of what they were handling. Could they really bring Vivian and Edward back after all this time? What would their lives look like now? How would their love survive the decades? There were disagreements, rewrites, moments when it all nearly fell apart. But the seed had been planted, and it was growing. In this new chapter, they knew they couldn't simply repeat the past. Pretty Woman 2 had to be more than nostalgia. It had to be a story with heart, depth, and truth. A story that could stand on its own while honoring the magic that came before. That's when the pieces began to fall into place. The script took shape, weaving together themes of second chances, the passage of time, and the enduring power of love. And with each draft, the excitement built. Finally, the world would get to see what happened after that limo drove away. After the fairy tale kiss, after the screen faded to black, asterisk for years, the idea of Pretty Woman 2 lived in the shadows, half rumor, half wishful thinking. It would surface like a ghost every few years, haunting entertainment headlines before disappearing again. There were moments when the whispers felt real, when an offhand comment from Julia Roberts during a press interview would make fans wonder, is she hinting at something? Then, Richard Gere might be spotted leaving a meeting with a well-known director, and the internet would explode. But just as quickly as the excitement rose, it would vanish into thin air. The truth was, Hollywood is a breeding ground for rumors, and sequels are the easiest spark to ignite. Studios love the idea of revisiting something that once struck gold. But Pretty Woman wasn't just any film, it was sacred ground. Every time the notion of a sequel came up, the same question would loom like a warning. What if we ruin it? For Julia and Richard, that question wasn't just about protecting their own legacies, it was about protecting the story and the characters that millions had carried in their hearts for decades. The rumors took many forms. Some claimed there was a secret script locked away in a producer's drawer. Others swore there was an outline penned by J.F. Lawton, the original writer that explored what happened after the fire escape kiss. One theory insisted the sequel would focus on Vivian and Edward's grown-up daughter. Another imagined Edward losing everything and having to rediscover himself with Vivian's help. Fan forums were flooded with what-if scenarios. The ideas were endless, but none of them came from an official source. Then came the turning point. It started quietly, almost unnoticed. A small entertainment blog posted an article about a mystery project being developed by a production company, known for working with both Roberts and Gere in the past. The article was vague, almost forgettable, except for one detail. It mentioned that the script was a continuation of a 1990s romance classic. Within hours, larger outlets had picked it up. Within days, the story was everywhere. The world wanted to believe it. Julia was asked about it during a charity gala. Instead of giving her usual laugh and deflect answer, she simply smiled and said, "You never know." That smile lit a fire. A week later, Richard was cornered by a reporter on a red carpet. When asked if he'd ever play Edward Lewis again, he replied, "If the right story came along, absolutely." That was all it took. The media frenzy that followed was unlike anything the original film had seen. Social media went into overdrive. Memes, fan edits, countdown clocks, even fake teaser posters started flooding timelines. People weren't just speculating anymore, they were manifesting. The noise grew so loud that even those who had never seen the original were suddenly curious about the love story everyone was talking about. Behind closed doors, something else was happening. The cast and crew who had once dismissed the idea were starting to feel the pull. Meetings began small, cautious, and deeply private. It wasn't about money. Pretty Woman had already made more than enough. It was about trust. Could Julia and Richard trust the writers, the director, the studio, and even themselves to step back into these roles without breaking the magic? Scripts were passed back and forth, read in private homes and over late-night video calls. Some were rejected immediately. Too cheesy, too predictable, too disconnected from the truth of who Vivian and Edward had become. Others came close but didn't quite land the emotional punch. The process was exhausting, and there were moments when both actors considered walking away again. But then, one script arrived that was different. It wasn't about recreating the past, it was about building on it. The story treated time not as a villain, but as a character in itself. It explored what happens when fairy tales meet reality, when love has to survive not just hardship, but the quiet erosion of years. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. And for the first time in decades, Julia and Richard felt the spark they'd been missing. The rumors had come full circle. What began as a whisper was now a conversation. And soon, that conversation would turn into an announcement that would send shockwaves through the industry. But before the world could know, the two people at the center of it all had to decide were they ready to fall in love on screen all over again? Asterisk, it happened on a Tuesday. The kind of day that starts ordinary, where the news cycle is filled with politics, celebrity gossip, and the usual noise of the internet. No one knew the world was about to shift, at least not in the corner of it that had been quietly waiting for more than 3 decades. It began with a single post. No press release, no interview. Just a short, wordless video uploaded to a verified account. The video was only 10 seconds long. A black screen faded into a close-up of a familiar jewelry box. Slowly, it opened only, for it to snap shut again, just like in that scene. Then the screen faded to white and two words appeared in bold, elegant script, "Coming soon, no date." No details. But in the background, if you listened closely, you could hear a faint echo of Julia Roberts' laughter, the kind of laughter that had once stolen a million hearts. The internet didn't just notice, it erupted. Within minutes, the clip was being shared by fans, journalists, and celebrities who had their own love affair with Pretty Woman. People paused their work meetings to watch it. Couples who had seen the original in theaters texted each other in all caps. Some fans didn't even need to see the names, they just knew. And that was the beauty of it. 2 hours later, the confirmation arrived. An official statement was released by the production studio, and this time, there was no ambiguity. For more than 30 years, audiences have carried the story of Vivian and Edward in their hearts. This winter, Julia Roberts and Richard Gere return in Pretty Woman 2, a new chapter in the timeless tale of love, courage, and the unexpected turns life can take. The world stopped for a moment. Social media feeds were taken over entirely. Hashtags like #PrettyWoman2 and #Vivian and Edward trended globally. News anchors interrupted regular programming to announce the reunion. Entertainment sites crashed under the weight of traffic. The story was everywhere, but the announcement didn't just give fans the headline they'd been waiting for, it gave them a glimpse of the story. Alongside the statement, a single promotional image was released, Julia and Richard standing on a balcony at sunset. She's in a flowing red gown, not the same one from the original, but one that echoes it in color and spirit. He's in a classic black suit, looking at her the way Edward once did in the penthouse, like he's seeing her for the first time all over again. The emotional reaction was immediate and overwhelming. People who had grown up with Pretty Woman shared old ticket stubs, VHS tapes, and stories about first dates at the movie theater. Parents told their children why this sequel mattered so much. Romance film fans spoke about how Vivian and Edward had redefined what a love story could be, not perfect, not polished, but real in its imperfections. Inside Hollywood, the reaction was just as intense. Actors, directors, and screenwriters praised the boldness of bringing such an iconic pair back together after so many years. There was excitement, yes, but also an undeniable pressure. Everyone knew the expectations were sky high, and Julia, she stayed quiet, no talk show appearances. Interviews. She let the announcement speak for itself. Richard was just as silent, disappearing from public view almost immediately after the reveal. It was as if they both understood something crucial. This wasn't about selling the movie. This was about letting the anticipation build on its own, letting the fans carry the torch until the time was right to speak. In the days that followed, articles dissected every detail of the announcement image. Was that a wedding ring on Vivian's hand? Was Edward holding a letter in his pocket? Did the backdrop hint at a return to Los Angeles or a move to somewhere entirely new? Every pixel was analyzed. Meanwhile, the studio quietly began its marketing campaign. Billboards with nothing but the iconic Pretty Woman font and a release date began appearing in major cities. At night, theaters in New York and Los Angeles projected the jewelry box clip onto their walls. Slowly, the countdown began. For fans, the waiting was torture. But for Julia Roberts and Richard Gere, it was the calm before the storm. The story was no longer theirs alone. It belonged to everyone who had ever believed in Vivian and Edward. And soon that story would finally continue. They say fairy tales end with a kiss. But what happens after the credits roll? That's the question. Pretty Woman 2 dares to answer. It doesn't open with a limo or a shopping spree. It opens with real life. Decades have passed since Vivian Ward climbed that fire escape to meet Edward Lewis, and while the world remembers that moment as a perfect ending, Vivian and Edward know the truth. Perfect endings are only the beginning of a much more complicated story. In this new chapter, Vivian isn't the same woman we last saw in that red gown. She's built a life, her own life outside of Edward's shadow. She's run her own business, faced her own failures, and learned that love, while powerful, doesn't solve everything. Edward, too, has changed. The polished tycoon has weathered storms of his own boardroom battles lost, family conflicts he couldn't charm his way out of, and the slow realization that the world he once controlled has moved on without him. When the film begins, they've been apart for years. Not because of betrayal or bitterness, but because time and circumstance carved different paths for them. They've lived, loved, and hurt in ways that fairy tales never warned them about. And yet, one twist of fate pulls them back into each. Others orbit. The setting isn't Beverly Hills this time. The sequel moves between the vibrant streets of New York City and the quiet charm of a coastal town in Italy. The reason for their reunion? A cause close to both their hearts, a charity gala to save an art foundation that once played a role in their love story. But as they're drawn back into each other's lives, it becomes clear that the past isn't something you can simply pick up where you left off. This isn't the story of a woman who needs rescuing, nor a man who needs saving. It's the story of two people trying to figure out if the magic they once had can survive the reality of who they've become. There's tension in their conversations, unspoken questions in their silences. Old habits surface, but so do old wounds. The charm is still there, the spark undeniable, but so is the weight of years apart. Vivian has learned how to stand on her own, but she's also built walls. Edward, for all his confidence, carries regret, the kind you can't fix with a grand gesture. In one of the film's most intimate moments, they find themselves walking through the streets of Rome at night, away from the gala's noise. The camera lingers on their faces, catching fleeting glances that speak louder than words. Neither knows if they're walking toward a new beginning or a final goodbye. Around them, life keeps moving. Secondary characters, some new, some familiar, add layers to the story. An ambitious young protege who reminds Vivian of her younger self. A rival businessman whose methods force Edward to question his own. And a piece of Vivian's past she's never told Edward about until now. The plot weaves romance with reflection, humor with heartbreak. There are callbacks to the original film, but they're subtle, like the way Vivian still twirls her hair when she's nervous, or how Edward pauses before opening a door for her. Fans will recognize these touches instantly, but they serve the story rather than steal focus. And yes, there's a grand gesture, but it doesn't come in the form of a limo or a fire escape. It's quieter, more powerful, a choice made not out of desperation, but out of love that has been tested and earned. A love that isn't about fixing someone, but about walking beside them, knowing exactly who they are. The end. Audiences won't just be wondering if Vivian and Edward end up together. They'll be asking themselves something deeper. What does it take to make love last? And as the credits roll, they might realize the answer isn't about fairy tales at all. It's about the courage to keep choosing each other. Even when the story gets messy, the film promises to be more than just a sequel. It's a love letter to everyone who has lived beyond their happily ever after and found that the real story was only just beginning. And for fans of the original, it's a chance to see Julia Roberts and Richard Gere do what they do best: make us believe in love all over again.